So even if Sonic Forces has a terrible story, its gameplay should be able to redeem it.
I mean, Forces is a boost game, how could they fuck this thing up? Oh boy, where do we even start?
Sonic Forces feels like it was created by a young kid who had just learned how to create a level in Super Mario Maker. Almost every single Sonic or Avatar stage in this game is essentially a straight road after straight road, with an occasional 2D section that forces the player to slow down. So let's start with explaining difficulties and characters first. Upon starting a new game, the player has the option of selecting one of the two difficulties. Normal mode is meant for newer Sonic players who may be unfamiliar with platformers. On normal mode, players' ring count is capped at 100, although they only drop 20 rings when hit. On the flip side, normal mode locks players out of the rankings, which is probably intended to prevent experienced players from cheesing the game. Hard mode is meant for experienced Sonic players. It increases the ring cap to 999, but upon getting hit, players drop all of their rings. However, all the content including rankings are unlocked, so hard mode should be most players' go-to game mode in this game. All footage shown in this video was captured on hard mode as well. Forces also scrapped the live system completely, so there are no worries about lives being shared between different characters. Sonic Forces has 4 playable characters, those being Modern Sonic, Classic Sonic, Player-Made Avatar, and Shadow the Hedgehog. Additionally, players can also opt to using Super Modern or Classic Sonic in their respective levels if they have Super Sonic DLC installed. Forces also introduces a 4th gameplay style across 4 levels, allowing players to utilize both Sonic and their own avatar at the same time. Right off the bat, after starting up a new save, one thing is immediately off. Sonic's idle animation is completely missing. Or I suppose the standing animation counts as one, but it lacks any personality and charm that Sonic's idle animations had in the previous games, and it also transitions onto the other animations pretty badly. And goddamn, he doesn't even blink. Sonic, are you okay?
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
The same applies to both Super Sonic and Shadow 2. This is extremely strange as Avatar has 2 gender-specific idle animations. And Classic Sonic of course has his iconic waiting animation. Besides, each character has that board falling idle animation from Sonic Lost World, although it's shared with all of them. Observant people can note that Sonic lacks alternative homing attack animations. In Generations and Unleashed, Sonic had around 3 to 4 different homing attack trick animations, but Forces' animation is the same one every single time, which is a shame. The same issue persists with Avatar's Wire Attack, which also has only singular animation. When rail grinding, Sonic only has one animation, and if he falls off a rail, he keeps going with his rail grinding animation. It also prevents him from double jumping in the air, and it looks comical. Sonic's model is lighter blue than before and has less quills. This was most likely done to prevent newer players from mixing Sonic with Shadow and Silver, who both have more quills than him. I do not personally like this change, but that is of course a matter of personal preference. Forces' Sonic model seems to be a weird mix of Generations' and Lost World's Sonic models, as Sonic has kept his idle pose from Lost World. Shadow also shares this pose as his character addition is nearly identical to Sonic's, with the exception of his boost color, skating and boost floating animations that seem to be ported from Generations. And lastly, when it comes to rank animations, Sonic, Shadow and Classic Sonic all have slightly adjusted animations that were presumably ported or replicated from older games. You can draw your own conclusions whether you find this practice cheap and nostalgia driven, but hey, at least they're high quality. Here's a few, for anyone interested. Animations out of the way, let's get into Sonic's and Shadow's gameplay. Sonic Forces was a long-awaited return to a highly popular boost formula after a 6-year hiatus. Lost World had brought new gimmicks like a run button and parkour mechanic, as well as driving the franchise's reintroduction of 3D spin dash. However, the gameplay in Lost World was a hit or miss, with many criticizing it for being too slow or relying too heavily on level-based gimmicks. Those gimmicks allowed more gameplay options but also tended to be more tedious than anything. So Forces brought back Boost with mixed results. Instead of obtaining boost from ring energy like in Generations and Unleashed, Sonic obtains his boost gauge from defeating enemies or running through a white wisp capsule like in Sonic Colors. To keep the boost gauge filled, players have to keep defeating enemies or be fast enough to reach the next wisp capsule location. I kinda like this mechanic because it makes Sonic's boost less powerful than what it was before, and it also requires skill to be able to maintain your boost properly. And in practice, this sounds great. However, even then, players can relatively easily blast through Sonic's levels by holding down the boost button. See, the biggest problem with Forces' gameplay is that every single level is painfully short and provides zero variety. For example, let's take the game's opener level, Lost Valley. The level begins with a linear path leading to a dash ramp. That ramp propels Sonic onto the next linear road. But this time there are enemies in his way. However, these enemies do not aggro Sonic at all, no matter what you do, cause they're scripted to just stand there to get boosted on. After a short homing attack tutorial, Sonic is thrown into a 2D section, where his horizontal speed slows down drastically compared to his 3D vertical speed. When Sonic returns to a 3D landscape, he's met with a loop-de-loop that has a fixed movement speed. Players can then choose whether they go right or left. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because both directions force Sonic into another scripted set piece filled with dash pads to keep Sonic's speed stable. Then the level ends. Every single Sonic level follows this style of level design. They do not provide players that many branching pathways or ways that could allow skilled players to complete levels faster. And those alternative paths that do exist are mostly designed to hide in secrets, such as red rings. The most insulting stage in the whole game is Sonic's third level, Luminous Forest, which has loads of dash pads and hordes of enemies that can easily be slaughtered with Sonic's boost. This whole level captures the main issue me and many others have with the boost formula. Sonic is running so fast that he becomes hard to control. More precisely, boost games make Sonic control like a racing car. To compensate, it is easier to develop stages that encourages players to go fast, rather than coming up with interesting platforming sections that older games had. But that also means that these games play out very brainlessly, because you can essentially win by just holding down the boost button. In fact, let me show you exactly what I mean.
Levels in Episode Shadow were a lot better than in the base game, and I enjoyed them quite a bit. They were challenging, they were fun to speedrun, and I feel like they had better level structure than the actual levels in Forces. Except Eggman's facility. S-ranking that one was pain in the ass. However, just making the level design harder doesn't specifically make the level any better. Even then, Episode Shadows' levels are not that imaginative, as most of them just add more stage hazards into the levels to make them harder and take a longer time than Forces' average levels, which I think is not the way to design levels in Sonic games.
Sonic has lost some moves from his previous moveset. Drift, Lightspeed Dash and Wall Jump were given to Avatar. Bouncing, Spin Dash and Parkour are unsurprisingly absent from the game, but Sonic regained his extended air boost from Colors. On the other hand, this air boost resembles Super Sonic's flight ability more than anything else, as players can easily cheese levels with it. The finest example in showcasing this would be Sonic's final level, Mortar Canyon, where most stage hazards can be easily avoided by holding down the boost button while in the air. Removing these abilities wouldn't be such a big of a deal if Sonic felt good to control, but he feels terrible to control. Sonic Forces has heavily downgraded Sonic's movement capabilities, like something as simple as moving Sonic around in circles. Yes, if you control Sonic around with an analog stick, it feels like you're controlling him with DS's directional pad.
No wonder these levels are so automated, you wouldn't be able to control Sonic otherwise.
Additionally, because Sonic is hard to control when he is fast, when you come across levels with tight corners with bottomless pits like Metropolitan Highway, if players do not carefully steer him, Sonic can fall down from the stage. I wish this game had drift. To balance Sonic's sluggish movement out, he was given a double jump to help out in 2D sections, but there's a catch. It's dreadful. Forces' double jump is by far the worst implementation of double jump I have ever had to experience on a platformer. Double jumps in gaming usually gives the player's character a reasonable raise in height mid-air, making it useful skill when approaching platforms from greater distances. Last World's double jump was fairly useful, especially when combining it with endless spin dash to perform lengthy heaps.
But in Forces, double jump is basically useless. That is because the double jump barely covers any height whatsoever.
Since Sonic's quick hop from Unleashed and Generations was removed, players are forced to use a normal spin jump to move around. But the problem is that sometimes the game triggers double jump instead of a homing attack when you're jumping around in the air, which results in untimely deaths. This wouldn't bother me if you could homing attack after a double jump, but it's so inconsistent that most of the time you don't want to double jump at all. Sonic's quick-step ability remains in the game, but it has considerable latency whenever you use it while boosting. This is extremely noticeable when playing through high-speed quick-step sections, when quick-step just refuses to work even when it functioned just fine in earlier entries. Even rail grinding has declined rapidly in Forces. I mean, it was already declining before, but it's even worse here. You can no longer switch your stance on the rail, and the rail speed is predetermined beforehand. That being said though, rail grind sections are quite niche in Forces, since they are often used to pan out the level time and to fill in gaps on levels whenever level designers were too lazy to insert platforming sections. I am looking at you, Eggate. Rail grinding illustrates Sonic's movement's core issue well. The overall momentum of the character's movement is terrible in this game. If Sonic boosts, he reaches his top speed instantly. But if Sonic doesn't boost, he first enters a leisurely jogging pace until he magically triggers the speed threshold, at which point he accelerates to his maximum running speed.
However, Sonic doesn't gain any speed from going down the slope, or he doesn't lose any speed from going up the slope. That being said, if you're too slow while entering a loop-de-loop or a slope, Sonic and Shadow still won't make it, as the game requires you to have X amount of speed to enter scripted loop-de-loop section as seen on screen right now. Also, if Sonic lands after a fall, he loses all of his speed. Sure, it is more realistic, but it is also frustrating throughout boss fights against Metal Sonic and Infinite. However, Sonic and Avatar kinda gain a little bit of a momentum from going down the slope while sliding. However, the speed boost is pretty insignificant. Sonic's slide always goes for specifically programmed duration and can be triggered at any time. Meaning, if you misclick the sliding button, you can fall down to the bottomless pit because Sonic had somehow found speed out of nowhere to slide forward. In other words, this game has a very scuffed momentum system. That is because your sliding speed is mostly predetermined. Your boost speed is already predetermined and you can't go any faster no matter what you do. Your rail grinding speed is predetermined. Your running speed acceleration is predetermined. So almost nothing is determined based on your character's momentum, which takes you completely out the immersion when you're blasting through these stages. Also, it's important to remember that even Sonic 1 had a proper momentum system, meanwhile Forces doesn't have one to begin with.
The level design itself doesn't help with the gameplay at all. Most levels are built around automation, which means that if you do anything even slightly creative like jumping before a spring, you will jump to your death. Gone are the days when players could utilize Sonic's skills in creative ways to improve their time in action stages. However, there are some positives that I found. Forces reintroduced QuickTime events and they are not half bad in the game. The disadvantage is that they are painfully easy and going for perfect timing with your button press only provides players more score. This could have been a perfect place to include more cinematic moments based on your timing or even grant access to alternative faster pathways, as a reward for perfect button presses. But nah, what did you expect? QTEs were also clearly implemented to serve memorable cinematic moments, which again is development time wasted on an area that could have been spent on making the levels themselves more fun to play. However, Shadow is completely unavailable to use on levels with QTE events, as most of them are pre-rendered. Supersonic on the other hand is available for every action stage.
But the super form will deactivate itself if the stage ends or there's a QTE cutscene. Players may find this frustrating as Sonic will transform back into the Supersonic after the QTE sequence ends. Also, while replaying these stages, these QTE sections get quite repetitive, to the point that I don't even want to play stages that include them. That is also why I enjoy replaying those stages that do not have QTE sections, such as Sunset Heights and Mortar Canyon, which ended up also being my favorite Sonic levels in the game. Such a shame they're over in a whim. Also, a huge shout out to Network Terminal. The first grinding section with multiple pathways was sensational to play. Unfortunate that the level quality dropped once Sonic enters the 2D section.
All in all, while Sonic's and Shadow's gameplay has been downgraded from earliest Sonic titles, they are arguably the best characters gameplay-wise of the bunch. So, how does our beloved Rookie play? Avatar is a brand new addition to Sonic franchise's never-ending character catalog, and well, they're decently implemented. Sonic fandom is notorious for being obsessed with its OCs, so it was only a matter of time when we got a game with the OC creator. And the OC creator is pretty decent in this game. Yes, it isn't perfect by any means, and there are plenty of games out there with more in-depth character creators, like Black Desert Online, but for a Sonic game it works out well. With this character creator you can build any OC of your dreams, from Edgy the Edgeworth to Sonic the Hedgehog himself. Of course, recreating an actual character can be a bit rough around the edges, but it's more than passable for Sonic Team's first attempt. Players can choose one from 7 different species, those being a dog, wolf, rabbit, bear, cat, bird, and of course a hedgehog. Every species has an extra ability. Dog restarts with some rings after dying. Wolf throws items towards them like a magnet. Rabbit has extended invincibility window after getting hit. Bear blows enemies away after performing wire homing attack. Cat holds onto some rings after getting hit. Bird can double jump. And lastly, hedgehogs dropped rings remain on the ground longer. Avatar's appearance doesn't matter at the start of the game, as you can customize it at any time. You cannot, however, change their sex or species after picking them. But fortunately, after completing the game, players gain an ability to make more characters to themselves. The customization options are fairly simple. You can change the skin and body color of your character as well as their victory pose. At the start of the game, applying clothing is locked, as clothes are unlocked after completing different missions throughout the game. These missions range from completing stages with S ranks and using specific Wispons to collecting a certain number of red rings and so on. There are also daily missions that players can complete to earn score boosts when completing action stages. There is an issue though. Every time players complete a stage in the early stage, they are prompted to slew of new unlocks. However, even though you will get a good deal of new items, unlock pop-ups don't stack with each other, so instead players will have to go through every single individual unlock one by one, depending on how many missions they have completed, meaning they could sit there smashing the A button till they're done. I have acquired almost every item in the game, and I gotta say, some of them are really decent. But then some of them are, well, yeah. Overall, there are a wide range of items to satisfy everyone. I still wouldn't say that 100%ing the game for these is worth your time and effort. After all, why would you go for these items if you weren't going to replay Avatar stages in the first place? So how are Avatar's gameplay and stages then? First we need to talk about the Wispons, as they are the main focus of Avatar's stages. Avatar uses these devices named Wispons that harness the power of wisps to create a powerful hand weapon, those Wispons being Burst, Lightning, Cube, Asteroid, Trill, Hover, and Void. After first unlocking them, players can use any of these Wispons on any Avatar stage. A Burst Wispon is the starter and default Wispon for Avatar to use. Players have an AoE, fire attack that spouts flames at enemies by holding down the assigned action button. By obtaining a Red Wisp capsule, players can trigger an explosion that will give them a highly powerful mid-air jump that is repeatable as long as Red Wisp's power lasts. Burst Wispon can be extremely powerful as it can destroy enemies from wide range, and with a Red Wisp capsule players can travel in air with ease, therefore skip major parts of the stage. A Lightning Wispon has a whip of lightning with a pretty wide range, making it a very effective way of taking down badniks in AoE range. By obtaining an Ivory Wisp capsule, players can perform a lightspeed dash near rings or enemies to traverse extremely quickly. This is basically a replacement for Sonic's lightspeed dash. A Cube Wispon turns enemies into cubes that drop rings once shattered. By obtaining a Blue Wisp capsule, players can create a walkable platform practically anywhere, which sorta reminds me of New Super Mario Bros. U's platform mechanic. Only problem that I have with this Wispon is that despite being powerful, it is clunky to use and it will stop your momentum, making it a terrible Wispon to use for speedrunning. An Asteroid Wispon locks onto the different enemies and use asteroids to destroy multiple enemies at the same time. By obtaining an Indigo Wisp, players gain invincibility for a duration of Indigo Wisp's power, and it also draws nearby enemies for players, just like Asteroid Wisp's ability did in previous Sonic games. Yes, with an Indigo Wisp, Rookie can walk on anything and not take damage. If these levels weren't easy enough already, this Wispon would be pretty powerful to use on them. A Trill Wispon allows players to attack forward with a Trill. Repeatedly tapping the action button increases its power to the point you can blast your avatar to go through hordes of enemies at light speed, but this ability is actually ridiculously broken as you can use it to skip large portions of levels, which means that if it's used effectively, it makes it very useful for speedrunning. By obtaining a Yellow Wisp, Avatar excavates through the ground, which makes climbing up walls very easy. A Hover Wispon blows enemies away with a windy shockwave. However, it doesn't have as big of a AoE range as something like Lightning Wispon's whip. And by obtaining a Green Wisp capsule, players can, well, hover. This is fairly effective for cheesing large chunks of levels like in Imperial Tower. Hover Wispon isn't that effective for combat though, which makes it obsolete on boss fight levels. Last but certainly not least, with a Void Wispon, players can suck in enemies to a black hole and collect different items by sucking them into said black hole. By obtaining a Violet Wisp, Rookie can teleport to the direction that player had held their left stick on the controller. Players can upgrade Avatar's Wispons by defeating bosses and completing challenge missions. Some of these upgrades vary from having a shield to faster rail grinding. While these Wispons bring much needed gameplay depth to this game, and are pretty well implemented in some levels, it is also very clear that some Wispons are better than others. For example, my favorite of them all, a Hover Wispon, is inferior to every other Wispon in combat, and while it's great for traversing, you cannot find a Green Wisp capsule from every stage, meaning it is straight up useless half of the game. Unless you're aiming for 100% completion, there would be no reason to turn off Burst Wispon, which also happens to be the starter Wispon. In fact, on my first playthrough, I completed the game without ever switching off from Burst Wispon. It is great to have variety, but when few Wispons blatantly power creep others, there is no incentive to give other ones a go. To compensate for Avatar's lack of physical abilities, they were given a wire attack that works like Sonic's homing attack, but is slightly slower to use. Avatar can also use the wire as a grappling hook to move between elevated areas, albeit most of these interactions are automated. Additionally, devs thought it was a clever idea to remove drifting from Sonic's moveset and give it to Avatar. Now, this wouldn't be that bad of an idea if this whole drift mechanic wasn't completely automated. When Avatar hits a drift detection zone, they immediately enter the drift animation at a predetermined speed. This takes away skill that Sonic's drift previously required to control, and instead it has become just a lame playable cutscene, similarly to QTE sections. Avatar's levels aren't really bad, but they are mostly forgettable. None of them really stand out, and they might have just as easily been Sonic's levels. Some of them are memorable, like Capital City, where Infinite morphs the city to have these strange looking buildings with his face on them. Also, I kinda like the gravity gimmick and I wish it was used more. Then there's Imperial Tower, which is a guilty pleasure of mine. Mostly because this level went on its way to make every single Wispon except Cubi Wispon useful, and using Hover Wispon completely breaks the level. It's fun. Like Sonic, Avatar has only one truly awful level in the game. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to develop a stage that trips away all of the player's control. While going down the water slide, Avatar can only move from right to left and cannot jump at any point. This means that you have to pray that these badniks don't knock you off the stage, which happened to me far too often. Aqua Road was painful to 100% and it was copy-pasted to episode Shadow too, which was even more painful to play. But in my opinion, the best Avatar levels were definitely the tag team levels. Sonic and Avatar tag team stages incorporate both Sonic's and Avatar's level design, and I thought that they were mostly pretty good. The best level to demonstrate this mechanic is Null Space. Now we all know that Null Space's Null Space part is absolutely laughable, but once your heroes emerge out of the wormhole, the stage gets rather enjoyable. There are numerous alternate paths to follow, and they utilize different Wispons in such a clever way. While most of the stage is spent on rails, by being precise with platforming and using air boost for your advantage, you can avoid large parts of tedious rail grinding entirely. But not even Null Space could escape from issues. It still struggles from similar automation issues like other stages. Dash rings, dash pads and springs are plastered everywhere to compensate for the game's terrible movement mechanics.
Also, the game wasted this amazing piece of music that is playing in the background.
Every tag team level showcases a new mechanic called Double Boost. In-universe explanation is that Sonic and Rookie combine their powers to unleash even stronger and faster boost than Sonic's usual boost. This makes no sense in theory as Rookie is just an average show, and Sonic should be faster than speed of sound, but whatever. Player has to mash the boost button to unleash Double Boost and the game's main theme, Fist Bump, starts playing. However, if you refuse to smash the boost button, Sonic and Avatar will first stumble and then proceed to double boost either way. And let me tell you, these sections are real thrill to play. Your boost gauge doesn't actually matter at all because double boost is a mechanic purely powered up by automation. Even if you run out of boost gauge, Sonic and Avatar will still keep double boosting, albeit at a slower pace. But arguably the biggest issue double boost has is that it is blatantly used as a filler mechanic to latch up stage time, serve cinematic moments, as well as to solve unsolvable plot problems like getting out of null space, eliminating Infinite, or to escape a rapidly exploding building. And since you can't even fail a double boost, it is essentially just 15 seconds of automated garbage that happens in every single tag team level. And since you can't skip these double boost sections, it means that these tag team levels get quite repetitive. It's kinda similar to these QTE sections that I talked about earlier, because players who have played these stages before cannot ever skip them, which means you're just spectating a playable cutscene once more. Overall, Sonic's and Avatar stages aren't particularly exceptional, but at the very least they're serviceable and sorta fun to play. Even with all of their flaws, you may still have fun with some of Sonic's boost stages, while Avatar's levels are very replayable if you want to earn all available clothing. They could also be a lot of fun to speedrun if you're into that. Even then, I think the only problem Avatar really has is the fact that every single level the Avatar goes through could have been completed by Sonic himself. Meaning that the whole gimmick around custom hero, or like custom character of your own, is kinda pointless. But at least Avatar is passable and plays just fine even with some flaws. However, Sonic's and Avatar's gameplay accounts only for 2/3 of the game, so what about classic Sonic? This game made me hate classic Sonic. Sonic Forces' iteration of classic Sonic is by far the worst in the entire franchise. He's just not fun to play whatsoever. For some reason, his physics, which were perfectly fine in Generations, were rendered infinitely worse in this game. He feels completely unnatural to move around, and he cannot even do a spin dash launches anymore, at least in the same way as before.
Also, additionally, for some reason, if you're using a controller, you cannot spin dash from holding down the X button anymore. You have to hold down your left stick and A button to spin dash now, which was always possible in Generations, but holding down the X button was so much easier.
Classic Sonic feels stiff to move around, and his mid-air movement has a ridiculous acceleration that makes it hard to keep his movement stable. He is even slower than in Generations and can't even go through loop-de-loop without assistance of a dash pad. In fact, without a dash pad or fully charged spin dash, he can't even go up the most simplest of hills.
You're supposed to just slowly float. What is this? Okay, let me take you up to speed. How can Sonic run? Like, to the top? But no, I need to spin dash. Oh, even with the spin dash, Okay, awesome. Good game. Good game mechanic.
Classic Sonic also bounces off from ring capsules and enemies very inconsistently, which results in a gamble whether he bounces off an enemy or not, which could cause untimely deaths. And while he has obtained a drop dash from Mania, which makes running around feel slightly faster, it feels clunky to use compared to how it felt in Mania. Of course, while physics are important in making a character playable, level design plays a huge part in making a character fun to play. Classic Sonic also happens to have the very worst levels in the entire game. I mean, for fuck's sakes, Classic Sonic's last level is a fucking side-scroller. A side-scroller! Most of them try too hard to pander our nostalgia boners, but they all fail spectacularly because all of them feel absolutely garbage to play. In Casino Forest, the main concept of the level is a casino/pinball. Where have I seen that before? But it has no relevance to the level. Instead, every casino mechanic on the level hinders your progress and is just badly implemented. Both Chemical Plant and Green Hill seem unimaginative and lifeless attempts of remaking old levels, and it is laughable when Mania succeeded in making refreshing remakes. Meanwhile, Force is just terrible. Force's Chemical Plant is arguably even worse as Classic Sonic starts drowning after 10 seconds of being underwater.
Whoa, the water level is rising. Something must have triggered it. Stay sharp.
How fast did Sonic drown? I was underwater for like 5 seconds.
Classic Sonic can also turn into Super Sonic, but his speed doesn't increase, and only benefit the player's gain is his invincibility. Classic Sonic's appearance in this game was simply to milk classic fans, despite the fact that Mania released recently. Sonic Mania was universally praised for its outstanding level design, adorable references, and endearing soundtrack. Meanwhile, Sonic Team is very oblivious of why Classic Sonic doesn't work in games like Forces. Classic Sonic thrives in games like Mania because the level design is built around Classic Sonic's abilities, and it constantly comes up with new creative gimmicks for levels, which is something that nostalgia pandering Forces doesn't excel at. The plots of classic Sonic games do not revolve around heavy topics such as war. The story is told through brief in-game cutscenes at the end of each zone, and those cutscenes are just meant as cute little add-ons to already well-polished games. Sonic 3 and Knuckles didn't have to show how Sonic and Tails got from Angel Island Zone to Hydro City Zone, but they showed it anyway, and it made the game even more enjoyable than what it was before. In addition, despite the lack of voice acting or spoken dialogue, Sonic, Tails and Knuckles had infinitely more character development in Sonic 3 and Knuckles than classic Sonic had in Forces. Classic Sonic lacks personality in Forces despite Sonic Team hiding these beautifully crafted, unused animations that just scream personality into Forces' game files. It is such a shame because classic Sonic ends up being nothing more than a shallow, slower version of modern Sonic that doesn't talk. Meanwhile, the amount of personality and care put into Sonic's characters in all the games and Mania is just remarkable. So for the love of God's sake, please, just keep classic Sonic in his own games from now on.
Cheer up, Tails. I'm sure we'll run into him again.
Oh God, no!
Now, I was planning to go into in-depth detail about the boss fights in this game, but quite frankly, they don't deserve it. 3 out of the 7 fights in this game are just the same thing with slightly adjusted difficulty, the best one easily being Metal Sonic's boss fight. Reusing the same fight wouldn't be that big of a deal if Metal Sonic's fight was somewhat unique. Because obviously it makes sense that Infinite's boss fights were about the same, but they just evolved in time, meaning Infinite would be tougher the more you fought him. However, this isn't the case. Instead, these 3 fights, Infinite's first fight, Metal Sonic's fight and Infinite's third fight, all behave the same. Catch the baddie with boost, homing attack onto them and repeat. Metal Sonic and Infinite are both finished off with a double boost too. And you know what these fights remind me of awfully a lot? Yeah, that's right. Silver's rival fight in Generations. The exact same core fight. Apart from these 3 fights, the rest of them are quite forgettable. Zavok's fight is simple, dodge attacks until the right moment and then attack. But at least seeing Sonic box Zavok was quite fun. Eggman's first fight is the very worst in a game. Its first phase is a copy-paste of the first ever boss fight in Sonic history, and its second phase has Egg Dragoon that throws rocks at classic Sonic. It's the easiest fight in the game as well as the most forgettable. Infinite's second fight is tedious to play too.
This battle can be finished very quickly if player uses Burst Wispon and successfully dodges Infinite's every attack. However, a problem arises with Avatar's acceleration. As I explained earlier, characters accelerate from a slow jog to their max speed very quickly. However, Avatar first has to go through that slow jog period. Dodging these obstacles properly is exceedingly hard because Avatar has to reach a max speed to gain maximum altitude mid-air. Unfortunately, jumping in the air stops the speed acceleration process altogether. This can lead to players jumping directly at the next hazard due to lack of speed, halting the fight for ages.
But how about the final boss battle in the game?
The final boss of the game is against the newly built Mega Egg Octopus. Dead Egg Robot. The first phase of the fight has classic Sonic say on a 2D moving platform, while Eggman throws rocks at him again. After hitting 2 Egg Cerberus 8 times, the second phase begins, where players get to control Avatar in 3D. Dead Egg Omelette tries to hit Avatar with its fists. If a player dodges the attack,
the player has a chance to counterattack.
Eggman will also try breaking the platform, which makes surviving his attack slightly harder. After dealing enough damage, Eggman Robot shatters, revealing an even more octopus-looking robot inside of it that pulls our main trio into a void, where the final phase of the battle begins. And what can I say, the third phase is yet another ripoff of Sonic Colors' final boss. Yeah, I know Lost World already did this, but Sonic Team seems to be so in love with the concept that they used it for the 3rd time now. And ironically, this Dead Egg Robot looks exactly like Egg Nigga Wisp from Sonic Colors. Players have the boost to get closer to Egg Nigga Wisp, so the trio can homing attack on it. But once more, if players miss a White Wisp capsule or train their boost cage before reaching Eggman, it will take ages for a new one to spawn. What makes the fight even worse is that during the quick step section, a White Wisp capsule can spawn inside Eggman's traps, which makes obtaining it impossible unless players are ready to lose their rings. Capsule spawn relies completely on RNG, so you would better hope you're feeling lucky while facing White Egg Cyborg. Delayed quickstep also makes the final phase irritating. Because the game relies so much on automation, if you jump to avoid the obstacles, you will stay in the same lane because apparently Sonic can't move right to left without using a quickstep now. In any case, after finally lowering Darth Vader android's HP with the power of love, friendship and teamwork, Sonic, Avatar and Classic Sonic are encouraged to triple boost into Wisp Egg Robot to finally defeat Eggman. If you fail a triple boost, the game throws your characters back until they have closed in their distance to Dead Wisp Octopus in order to try again. Yes, this could go on forever if the player doesn't do anything. Wouldn't it be better if Eggman woke up from being knocked unconscious and just slapped the trio out of existence? Then failing the triple boost could have actual consequences. But of course, our linear game meant for toddlers must have a linear ending as well. So those were all the bosses in the game. 5 out of 7 of them were straight up rehashed from earlier games or from Forces itself. This wouldn't be an issue if the game was an ultimate tribute to Sonic's history like Generations. After all, Forces was released on Sonic's 25th anniversary, but Forces tries to be its own game. It is respectable, but they failed at making a memorable game that differs from earlier entries. Sonic Team, please come back with brand new ideas. We all know you're capable of that. There are also some secret hidden stages that the player can access by completing stages and missions. Most of them are just gimmick stages designed to challenge skilled players that have already finished the game. I don't personally like them due to hating how this game controls, but I can see how some people may enjoy them.
But I ended up S-ranking all of them, just like I did with the normal stages and episode shadow stages, and then I learned there is not an achievement for S-ranking all of the stages. Yeah.
If there is one aspect that is consistently good in Sonic games, it is the sound design, more precisely, the soundtrack. And while I don't like reviewing voice acting in my reviews because it is very subjective whether you like English or Japanese voice acting, I have to give a shout out to the English voice actors of this game.
Well, this game has some rubbish lines, sometimes like this one.
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
You can blame rubbish writing for that, as all of the voice actors provided great performances across the board.
I especially appreciated Liam O'Brien's portrayal of Infinite. He clearly put his all into bringing Infinite to life. Such a shame that the script he was given sucked donkey balls.
I'm going to fight and die here, or run away in fear
Also, Roger Craig Smith's Sonic has really grown on me. Forces was arguably Roger's strongest Sonic performance as of yet, and I cannot wait to hear what he does in Frontiers.
Oh, great! See, Infinite? Now we're getting to know each other. So, what's your favorite color? Do you like long, romantic walks on the beach? What's the source of your power? You can skip the first two questions if you like. Wrong, loser! The things that can't be defeated are heart, soul, and the bonds of friendship. 3 things you and your counterfeit cronies lack.
When it comes to Forces' soundtrack, I actually really like it. For example, this game's cheesy main theme Fist Bump, which is sung by Hoobastank's main vocalist, Dog Rob, is pretty good. Yeah, it's not as good as He's a World or Live and Learn, but it is really darn good. It matches with this game's message really well, and I found myself singing it quite a bit after Forces' release. Infinite's theme song Infinite, that is sung by Tyler Smith and Andy Bain from the metalcore band Danger Kids, is also fairly decent. The lyrics may be quite too edgy for my liking, but they suit perfectly in Infinite's character, especially his arrogance and superiority complex. This game offers 3 different genre of music for each playable character. For Sonic, he has electronic elements and with some signature Sonic guitar blending in the background. They're not as good as I would have hoped for, but they fit Sonic's fast, no time to waste attitude really well. For example, my favorite, More the Canyon, has that dramatic tune that just screams Final Battle energy. Such a shame that the level is so short that no one gets to hear this masterpiece. Avatar's music, on the other hand, is consistently best in the game. Avatar's music are also mostly electronic, with some of them merging dubstep with beautiful piano instrumentals in. Not only that, they're also all vocalized, with each of them echoing Rookie's ongoing thoughts about the world. All my anxiety now is taking control of me. I'm holding on to every little bit of hope. Is how cowardly Rookie is feeling anxious about their huge role in rescuing Sonic, and how despite this they will keep on going for the sake of Resistance and the world. Got a feeling you're near, somewhere here in the atmosphere. I can't escape, there's nowhere left for me to hide. Is how Rookie feels like Infinite could lurk out of the shadows at any time, and it also foreshadows how they will have to meet each other once more later on. Here comes the enemy, strike them down. We can't let evil win, take them out. This is justice. This is what's right. Is describing how Rookie has finally decided what is wrong and what is right. The right in this case being helping the Resistance in defeating Eggman and Infinite. Right now I realize I can do it if I try, I can do anything. The gears are beginning to turn around. Right now I realize, I know I can't deny, nothing's impossible, the wheels are set in motion now. which finally finalizes the phase. The rookie has finally acquired enough determination and courage to take down Eggman's empire. I wish more Sonic games included auditory storytelling in their music, because not only we get banger tunes, but we also obtain some interesting lore bits. Avatar's music especially helps establishing Rookie as their own individual character with personality. Then there's classic Sonic's music, and yeah, I have mixed feelings about these ones. Well, in my opinion, most of them are pretty shit, in all honesty. But then there's tunes like Ghost Town that just bop. Classic Sonic songs have this vintage chip tone to them that was probably intended to emulate style of music from Genesis days, but instead they come across sounding like cheap imitations of classic music, which is completely unnecessary, and you all know it if you have played Generations or Mania, because those games had amazing soundtrack for classic Sonic. I mean, I would rather listen to City Escape Act 1 or Studiopolis Act 1 instead of listening to Casino Forest or Iron Fortress. The problem is, with this tone, is that it just doesn't sound good with voices at all. When you compare it to the electronic music or the orchestrated music in the menus, it just doesn't sound good. And it also doesn't fit with the somber narrative that this game is trying to tell to us. However, I still wouldn't say it's the worst soundtrack of all time, but it just brings this whole soundtrack down when like it mostly has good tracks, and then there's the classic Sonic ones. Many tracks, on the other hand, they just perfectly capture the feel of war and optimism arising from Horizons. And most of them were actually orchestrated by London Symphony Orchestra, which is pretty cool. Episode Shadow DLC introduces 3 new remixes of old songs from Shadow's past. Vestopolis from Shadow the Hedgehog, Rhythm and Balance from Sonic Adventure 2's A White Jungle, and Supporting Me from Sonic Adventure 2's Bio-Lizard boss fight. While these songs may sound quite out of place, I will give them an exception since this is a DLC and they're so darn good. It's great to see Sega Sound Team and Tomoya Ohtani still loving our beloved Edgelord. I also want to thank whoever was in charge of creating Metal Sonic's boss fight theme for this game. Metal Sonic's theme is a remix of the original USA version of Metal Sonic Fight from Sonic CD, and it is absolutely glorious. It is by far my favorite music bit in this game, along with Mordor Canyon and Moonlight Battlefield. All in all, Sonic Forces' soundtrack is still good, even with its few black sheeps, as expected from Sonic OST. In fact, I would say it's top 10, the best Sonic soundtracks. Which is no surprise, Sonic games are well known for their incredible soundtracks, like I said, and even the worst games tend to have banger soundtracks. Except for this one, we do not talk about this game. Now, graphics in a game don't really matter if the game itself is amazing to play. Take Super Mario 64 for example. And I personally do not really care about Sonic games' graphics, though of course the better graphics, then of course that's great, like I don't mind. But when it comes to Forces, we need to have a little chat about it. See, as I mentioned at the very start of this series, Sonic Team spent some of the Forces' development time on creating Hedgehog Engine 2, a game engine that was meant to enhance new Sonic games with prettier graphics. So, did Forces succeed in this task? Well, yes and no. Before anyone is wondering what am I saying, all the footage in this video was recorded on max settings on PC. But sometimes the game doesn't really look that good. Of course, there are some times that the game looks really good, like almost better than games like Unleashed and Generations. For example, when you go to the Nameless City or Metropolis, or maybe even Chemical Plant. The water textures and shaders are great, and also the particle effects are pretty clean in my opinion. But sometimes the game looks very lifeless. For example, when you look at the characters, the character models themselves are not that pleasing, and they even look plastic-like sometimes. In Sonic's case, it doesn't really help out that his fur is washed out by default, as I mentioned before, it's lighter blue than before. The game's lighting doesn't contrast colors of characters' skin that well, which is why they just they just don't feel immersive in the world. Stage lighting is also very inconsistent. Like I mentioned before, Nameless City, Chemical Plant, and Metropolis look gorgeous, but then there is Eggman Empire Fortress, which looks like it is straight up from PlayStation 1 game. In fact, that gives me a brilliant chance to criticize this game's worst pre-rendered cutscene. And if you have played this game, you probably already know what I'm going to talk about. When the Resistance under Knuckles' lead launched an attack on Eggman's Imperial Fortress, we can see these copy-pasted avatar beings behind our main characters. And for example, these egg-eyed dogs just can give anyone lifelong nightmares. I mean, just look at them! Next, if you pay a close attention, you can notice that the lighting in this scene is completely off and outright unfinished. And somehow the crown texture is like it was stripped off from a PlayStation 1 era game. No, even worse, like NES era game. It's just disgusting to look at. The next part is not about graphics, but it's kinda strange either way, because when the bells scene starts, Shadow just tackles these phantom copies off the screen, but if you look at the scene in slow-mo, these phantom copies just fly out of screen while maintaining their animation as if they were toy soldiers. What the fuck is this? And the worst of all, this cutscene is locked to 30 FPS, while in-game generated cutscenes run at the smooth 60 FPS. Which was very noticeable when playing on PC. What does this have to do with graphics? Well, what I'm trying to say is that this game is unpolished. However, Sonic Unleashed, a game released in 2008, and it is leagues ahead forces in graphical quality, animation quality, as well as storytelling and gameplay quality. It raises loads of question marks on Sonic Team's competence. In my opinion, Unleashed is still by far the best looking Sonic game, with Generations coming in close second. And while I think Forces is third in that list, it is still a really good looking game, and it's not a bad looking game by any means. But it could sure look a lot better, because when you look at Unleashed, that was released for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and it's a game that still struggles to run on modern emulation in smooth 60 FPS. While it looks absolutely gorgeous in the same time, it's just kinda strange how Forces just doesn't look as good as you would expect when this new engine was given so much hype that it was given. So when it comes to that, I really hope Frontiers can deliver on graphical front.
And that is really all I can say about the game.
Sure, I can mention that once you have beaten the game, the main menu changes from Resistance HQ to a white version of it, which signals you that Resistance has moved on from the war and is now preparing to restore the world from Eggman's deeds, leaving only one singular Flora on the floor.
Sonic Forces doesn't have co-op or any other type of multiplayer options, but players can complete 4th best times on the leaderboards, which are always cheated on PC. Also, there is an avatar renting system where players can borrow someone else's avatar and swap between their own and rental avatar midway through the level. Also, there is an SOS mission system in the game. Players gain access to it after completing the first stage. There are 3 types of SOS missions, which are represented by 3 different colors. Red. The player has to clear a stage using a brand new rental avatar. Green. The player has to clear a stage with their rental avatar, but they can switch to their own avatar at any time. Blue. The player has to find a rental avatar from a capsule, free them, and clear the stage. As a speedrunner and game enjoyer, I didn't find these optional features particularly useful, but they are available for any completionist out there, as completing SOS will unlock new outfits for player-made avatar. Players can also rewatch cutscenes using the game's theater option, however in-world map dialogue is only accessible again if players start a new save file. There are no New Game Plus options available, so starting a new game doesn't grant any players with any new replayability. And well, while I personally don't find that many glitches in the game, it is evident that the game is unpolished with how Sonic lacks something as simple as an idle animation. Classic Sonic's model is directly ported from generations with zero changes, yet his physics are completely different. And the game is automated as hell and is just generally boring to play at times, which hints at it being rushed for the holiday seasons. But yeah, that is about all I can say about the game. I do, however, have some suggestions about how to improve the game in both storytelling and gameplay aspect. The fundamental idea of Eggman taking over the world is honestly brilliant, so seeing it wasted is quite saddening. An inclusion of the Phantom Ruby could also still remain in the game's narrative if only writers spend time on establishing how it works in comparison to Mania. Maybe Eggman and Infinite created a phantom copy of Sonic that Earth Resistance would be afraid to fight. Meanwhile, the real Sonic is under a solitary confinement. His personality would change from being held captive for 6 months to the point that he had become unconfident, if not outright broken, as a person. So throughout the game, his friends and rest of the Resistance would seek to restore his mental and physical health to a point where he could have a revenge on Eggman, as well as spoil his plans in process. The punchline of the game could then be that anyone could recover from their trauma if helped by great friends. While Sonic is recovering, the game could bring his friends to the spotlight, which allows us to play as beloved characters like Tails and Knuckles. In my version of Forces, I would also scrap Avatar entirely and replace the clothing unlock system with an ability to customize all of our playable characters. Imagine Sonic with Shadow's skate boots or Knuckles with sunglasses. With the levels, I would start by removing Green Hill and coming up with completely new stages instead. Or why not give some other stages from Sonic's history some love that didn't previously make it into generations, for example Windy Valley, Pyramid Cave, Radical Train and Dragon Road. Additionally, instead of having 30 levels, we could have 15 well-designed, longer levels with loads of replayability. And please, if you really have to include classic Sonic in a game, just make his levels fun and his physics playable, thank you. I don't know if my suggestions would really help in making a better game, but at least they sound better in my head. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Following the release of Sonic Forces, Sonic-related media has remained quiet on all things Sonic. Sonic's official Twitter would occasionally post a meme or two, or even an annual Twitter takeover, but other than that, Sonic franchise has been dormant for many years. Sure, we did receive new games. Sonic Mania was re-released in July 2018 with some additional content, now dubbed as Sonic Mania Plus. 2019 saw the release of regularly planned Mario and Sonic Olympic Games title, as well as a new Sonic racing game, Team Sonic Racing, where we also saw a return of Crush 40. I haven't played Team Sonic Racing at all myself. From what I have heard, it was completely passable as a game. And now in 2022 we have Sonic Origins that finally featured Sonic 3 and Knuckles in widescreen. Alongside Mania released a Sonic Forces Speed Battle, a mobile game that probably introduced plenty of new Sonic fans onto the franchise. Again, I haven't played the game myself, but it is apparently still updated till this day with new characters, so that's good for anyone who enjoys the game. And then there is an official Sonic Roblox game called Sonic Speed Simulator that was launched earlier this year. Yeah, it exists, I guess. Once more, I haven't given it a try, but I guess if you have a Roblox account, you could give it a try. Probably the biggest news Sonic received throughout these 5 years was an announcement of a live-action movie starring Ben Schwartz as Sonic and Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik. And I gotta say, without the internet's outcry, this movie would have been a complete pile of shit. Yeah, we all know what happened. The first trailer of the movie dropped, and we saw the CGI monstrosity that was supposed to be Sonic the Flipping Hedgehog. Thankfully, someone at Paramount forced the animation and character modeling team to completely redesign Sonic's look, and I'm so glad they did that, because the end result is excellent. Because of this redesign, the film was postponed until January 2020, when it was released to critical acclaim. I think we all watched the movie with low expectations, but then come out of it saying, wow, that was actually pretty good. Yeah, sure, it had a cheesy plot and out-of-place humor, but it was Sonic for sure. Ben Schwartz did a surprisingly good job at voicing Sonic, and Jim Carrey was absolutely amazing as Eggman. So unsurprisingly, Sonic the Movie got a sequel, and even though I still haven't seen it myself yet, it was apparently even better than the first one. And I have to admit, these films were perhaps the best thing that has happened to Sonic in over a decade. Sonic name has been in the mud ever since Sonic 06 dropped, and it hasn't regained its popularity in the minds of younglings ever since. But now, thanks to these movies, there are more young Sonic fans than ever before, and that is great. To help with this, a Netflix show, Sonic Prime, is launching pretty soon. Now all we need is an above average game. In late 2021, after 4 years of waiting, we got a first teaser for the next upcoming mainline Sonic game, Sonic Frontiers. Then we had to wait months and months and months and months for the next content drop to come out. When we finally got to see gameplay, fans, me included, were skeptical. The game looked far from finished, and it was clear that Sonic's model and physics were straight up ported from Forces. Thankfully, we got some more gameplay footage later on, which seemed much more polished and fun to play. With these new trailers, Sega and Sonic team has managed to rebuild the hype for the game. While I have my suspicions, I really hope that Frontiers is a great game. And with a great game, I don't mean a product that is purely meant for consuming purposes, but rather one that Sonic fans years from now will regard as one of the best Sonic games ever released.
Because if Frontiers flops, that might be the last nail in the coffin for long-time Sonic fans, like myself.
To wrap this video up, Sonic Forces was a massive failure in almost every aspect. It had a weak story, pathetic characters, frustrating gameplay, and downgraded graphics. Forces is a prime example of how nostalgia can ruin a game.
There are forced nostalgia parts scattered all over the game, from overused locations to a forced link between Mania and Forces.
And I honestly think that without classic Sonic, this game could have been better, as his appearance adds absolutely nothing new to the table.
Forces' amazing soundtrack doesn't even save this game in my eyes, and that's a shame.
But hey, at least Sonic fans got something good in the form of a customizable avatar. Is Forces the worst Sonic game ever made? No, not even by a long shot. When games like Sonic 06, Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic Freeriders, Sonic 4 Episode 1 and Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric exist. But it is the worst boost game by far, and the worst mainline Sonic game since Sonic 4 Episode 1. If you liked Forces and still do after listening to my review, all power to you, I'm not going to stop you. But that isn't going to change the fact that Forces was an extremely mediocre game, an especially disappointing one at that, considering how much potential it had. Thank you all for watching and listening.
We can show the world what we can do. You are next to me and I'm next to you. Pushing on through until the battle